Well, I'm glad some folks got some use out of it besides just me. AutoMapper got started, 13 years ago now. And like all of my open source projects, it really came out of a project. And so this was an ASP.NET MVC project in like the very, very early days of ASP.NET MVC. And we knew we didn't want to do web forms because MVC was just announced at the Alt.NET conference like a few months before that. And so we knew that was going to be the future and we wanted to use it. But when it was released, there was really no real guidance about how to use this framework. ASP.NET MVC was really just like, here are all these pieces, and then you kind of figure out how do you want to put everything together. We saw very early on that there was going to be a problem in our MVC applications if we used these domain models as the thing that was going to be the model for the view. So the V in MVC is model view controller, and it expects a model. And the M, my old joke was the M is silent in ASP.NET MVC because there was nothing that said, here's how to do the M. So we had to figure that out. And because there was really nothing in the framework to kind of help you with that M, we thought instead of using our kind of rich domain models as a thing that we pass through, we'll create this very, very specific data transfer object or DTO that would represent that information for that screen. And we called those at the time view models. Didn't really have a better name for it, but that was the idea we had. So probably about a month to 6 weeks into that project, we started to notice some interesting aspects of these view models, and that every single view model for every screen was like hand designed, bespoke, and really for no good reason. They were just all different, not because they're supposed to be, but just because each developer would just like, well, today I'm going to design my view model like this. And this kind of subtleties that came up were things like names. Sometimes the names would be long and developers would just shorten them. Why would they shorten them? Because they felt like it. No real reason why. And so the next developer that had to go maintain that page would have to translate in their head like, oh, when you have this property, it actually means this property on the model. And they'd have to do that kind of translation all the time. So the architect at the time came up to us like, we got to solve this problem. I don't know what the solution is, but here's what we're seeing. We're seeing developers spend time handcrafting view models, and that's not adding any value to the overall project. So can you figure this out? So in a couple of weeks, I came up with the first prototype of AutoMapper, and the overall idea there was that we designed these view models as kind of a specification for what they should look like. And then something looks at those view models and is able to track back into some source object how that information should then map to that view model, so that we get rid of all these kind of bespoke custom view models and just make it look exactly like the source model, except flattened out. So try to get rid of some of the nested objects and make it look exactly like the old thing and just call it a day. So that was really how it started. Was we were starting an application that was going to have like hundreds of screens, and we saw all this thousands of lines of code of custom view model stuff. We said, we don't want that. We want something that just enforces a convention and kind of lays down the guidelines for the developers. At the time, for us old timers in .NET, it wasn't always an obvious thing that if you have a set of code, you should just make it open source. So we had this conversation internally. We're like, well, what do we do with this? It's not specific to this customer. It wasn't even developed on the customer's dime. So what do we do with it? Let's just make it an open source project. So at the very least, on the next project, we can use this library again. The reason why I made it open source is to be able to have other people use this. When I first started making it, I recognized like this could really help a lot of projects. And the way that we were building ASP.NET MVC applications, I thought was a great way of doing it. So I wanted to share not just the library that we were using to help with that, but also the thought process and ideas behind that as well. So it's kind of a package deal. It's like, here's how we build MVC applications, and here's the library that helped enable us to do that as well. There were folks talking about it, but there wasn't a ton of direction from Microsoft. And so we were all kind of the community, like, how do we do this? How do we build MVC applications in a sustainable way? I mean, you're part of that community as well. And Steve Smith and Javier Lozano, there's just a lot of folks out there that are really kind of laying the groundwork for here's how to build MVC applications. Over the lifetime of the project, I've still been the primary maintainer of AutoMapper. My very first commit 13 years ago, until today, I'm still the primary developer. These days, there are more contributors, even ones that have like ownership admin access. And even now, it's part of the .NET Foundation. So if something were to happen to me, it would continue to live on, I guess. Getting contributors for open source projects is always a big challenge. Early on in the project, it was a really big feather in my cap to see someone want to contribute back to it. I didn't really do a lot of promoting. I've never even given a talk on AutoMapper. I've never given a conference talk or anything like that. It's always been about the projects and then how that thing leads into it. So I was super happy to see the first person that wanted to contribute code back to it. And of course, on Google Code, you have to submit a patch, which is a zip file. So I was so excited that someone took the time to give me the code for it that I just blindly accepted it. So I did have to learn over the years that there are some people that really want to contribute back, but because I'm the primary maintainer, if someone gives me a feature 7 years ago, I'm on the hook for if anything goes wrong with it today. And that original person is long gone. Being on the other side of the coin of submitting pull requests to open source projects, it could be quite frustrating to open a PR and then have it sit for weeks, months, even years sometimes. And so I try to empathize with people that submit those issues and pull requests, understand that they've taken time out of their day to try to give back to this project. So the first thing I try to do is just understand the problem that they're trying to solve. So ideally, every bit of code they could submit, it starts with that issue. Like, I'm trying to solve this problem. Does your project solve it? And so I definitely encourage that, and we'll have these discussions on the issue list where the end is like, yes, this seems like a good idea. And if you open a pull request, we'll be happy to take it, which may not be the answer they want because they probably want me to add the code. But since this is a volunteer project, I realize like if someone really is a champion for the feature they want, they're going to submit that code back. And hopefully I can try to make it as easy as possible to have that. But I think the reality is that no open source can really be successful once you get to a certain size, unless it has some kind of sponsorship. And I don't know of really many projects out there that don't have that kind of full-time folks on it. So I spend as much time as I can. The reality is, so I spend about an equal time in open source, but it's on the projects that my clients need, not that's just like in my war chest. I definitely remember before ASP.NET MVC came out, really, it was much more difficult to get any kind of open source in your project. Then that, open the floodgates. That and the jQuery thing, that was another huge thing with Microsoft. Like, we will provide support for people using jQuery. The end. But I do use tools that are trying to make a living off of their open source projects. And the big challenge for me is trying to figure out how I can get the money from my clients to them. And I wish it was a lot easier, because I feel for the open source folks in the world that are trying to make a living off their projects, but don't have sponsorship. I'm hoping that, the GitHubs of the world make that kind of thing a lot easier, that, you have everything from the donate button on your project page to the ability to have some way to have enterprise support agreements. They can go through procurement, like, help for those folks to say, someone wants some kind of support deal, that's an easy thing to do as well. So kind of the entire spectrum, so that the folks that really want to make, open source sustainable and need to, they can.